Ready? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Give me a book. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Give him that book. Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Thank you. Jai Mr. Paramahansa Bhajikacharya Ashtotar Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pradikacharya Ashtotar Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavanda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktabinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Prakash, I have one complaint about the fan. It's blowing on you, it's not blowing on me. Just kidding. No, just, yeah. Perfect. Okay. We'll turn it off in a little bit. All right, now, some of you were here yesterday. Are we on verse 42 or 43? 43, yes, I remember that word, gnanam. That was hard to pronounce. Okay. All right. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 16th day of September 2020 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in the first chapter, observing the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Text number 43, page 59. You're all set up, right? Okay, very good. Utsanna kula dharmanam Manushyanam Janardana Narake Niyatam Vaso Bhavatit Yanushushuma Utsanna Kula Dharmanam Manushyanam Janardana Narake Niyatam Vaso Bhavatit Yanushushuma Utsanna Kula Dharmanam Manushyanam Janardana Nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushuma utsanna kula dharmanam manusyanam janardana Nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushuma utsanna kula dharmanam manusyanam janardana Nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushuma utsanna kula dharmanam manusyanam janardana Nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushama. Ed, give it a shot. Utsanna kula dharmanam manusyanam janardana Nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushama. Ivanya. Go ahead, try it. You'll get better. Okay, all right. You can take that. You don't need the mask for this. Utsanna kula dharmanam manusyanam janardana nadake niyatam vaso bhavati janusushama. Utsana spoiled, kula dharmanam of those who have the family tradition, manusyanam of such men, janardana, O Krishna, nadake in hell, niyatam always, vasaha residence, bhavati it so becomes, iti thus, anushushama I have heard by disciplic succession. Translation: O Krishna, maintainer of the people, I have heard by disciplic succession that those whose family traditions are destroyed dwell always in hell. Purport: Arjuna based his argument not on his own personal experience, but on what he has heard from the authorities. That is the way of receiving real knowledge. One cannot reach the real point of factual knowledge without being helped by the right person who is already established in that knowledge. There is a system in the varnashram institution by which before death one has to undergo the process of atonement for his sinful activities. One who is always engaged in sinful activities must utilize the process of atonement called prayashchitta. Without doing so, one surely will be transferred to hellish planets, to undergo miserable lives as the result of sinful activities. Om jnana timirandasya jnanandjana shalakaya chukshu unmidatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So, it may not pertain here to most of you, but there was an important adjustment that was made, revision that was made to this translation, which for many years read like this. O Krishna, maintainer of the people, I have heard by disciplic succession that those who destroy family traditions always dwell in hell. That Arjuna is worrying about himself, that he's going to be responsible. But actually the translation is that those whose family traditions are destroyed dwell always in hell. So there's an important distinction there. But the Baba makes the point that Arjuna is referring to the Vedas. He's heard from authority, right? Disciplic succession. So this brings up the topic of Amnaya. Amnaya. Amnaya is the first of the 10 root principles of philosophy that were discerned by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he wrote a long verse with describing these 10 roots of philosophy. And he wrote a book called the Dashamula Tattva, I believe. And he also wrote a longer book called the Jaiva Dharma, which is a great opus, philosophical opus, in the form of a little novel. You know, it's like a novel, so there's some plot. Mostly a series of conversations, as Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita is. And really the essence of this, or the outline, the framework of the Jaiva Dharma, big long book, 1,000 pages, is the Dashamula. So it's important to understand these principles. And the first one is Amnaya. And Amnaya means the Vedic knowledge, the revealed truth that Krishna revealed to Brahma, and that was written down in the 4 Vedas and explained in the Puranas and the Smritis and the Mahabharata, and all the works that we know as what probably called Vedic literature or Vedic literatures. As given, this knowledge as given and received by the disciplic succession. In other words, it's a knowledge that's been passed down. The example is often given of a fruit. Imagine a mango tree, you know, where the fruits at the top of the tree are really ripe, and you want to harvest those, you know, and bring them to market. Well, you can't just get up there and then throw them down, you know. So they're passed down carefully and then put very gently and gingerly into the box, you know, so they're not injured. So similarly, this knowledge has to be received by the proper source and then passed on in the proper way, so that it comes down and it's still completely authoritative. It hasn't been distorted. So that's what he's referring to here. Utsana Manusyanam Janardana. Anushushuma. So Anushushuma means, I've heard by disciplic succession. You may hear in that word Anushushuma. Anu means to follow carefully, and Shushuma means to hear, a hearing process. You know, hearing from the right person and hearing with the right attitude. It's related to this word shushusho, which comes in the Bhagavatam several times, right at the beginning, which Prabhupada translated variously as submissive all reception. It's pretty clear what that means, you know. And then ardent hearing, like you can imagine Pariksit hanging on every word, you know. He had no time to waste, right? So every word counts, and he was hearing from the perfect speaker. He was a perfect listener. So that's Arjuna is saying, well, this isn't my idea, but this is authoritative. And so I've heard by disciplic succession that those whose family traditions are destroyed dwell always in hell. Well, he's described in previous verses how when I'm instrumental in killing all of these soldiers, then society would be so disrupted that the normal functions, what is it called? Some scars won't be performed anymore. Especially, specifically, the ones for relieving the pitris of forefathers from sin by offering shraddha and prasadam, you like to get. So that function will be disrupted, and therefore the traditions will be lost, and I'll be responsible for it. And they'll go to hell. They'll suffer tremendously because they're not performing these proper samskars. So this is another argument that he's giving why he doesn't want to fight in the battle, you know. But he's neglecting the truth that has been explained earlier, that nobody's going home from this battle, whether you fight or not. Krishna's on the chariot. He's there. He arranged it. You know, he had all kinds of efforts to avoid the battle, but the other side was adamant. You know, if the other side is adamant to fight, there has to be a fight. You can't avoid it. Yeah. So, but Arjuna is illogically thinking that he'll save them by not fighting. But all that'll happen is that he'll break his own dharma. He'll actually be committing sin by neglecting Krishna's order, and they'll be killed anyway. That comes out later in the book. So, but the point is made here, this idea of prayaschitta. Prayaschitta is a means of atoning. This idea of atoning for sin is that, you have the understanding that you performed sinful activities, and there'll be something to pay for that. So before death, you want to atone for those sins so that the reaction is not so severe, or even you can negate it. Now this concept is transcended or given in proper context in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the famous pastime of a Jamil, and his taking shelter of the holy name at the very last moment of death and being delivered. So what happened was that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 5th canto has a whole description of the universe. You know, it's pretty difficult actually. Many of the verses are not really verses; they're actually just prose passages. Sanskrit can be in prose. You know, we're so used to these verses, but And very difficult. It's much harder to translate these prose passages because, first of all, in Sanskrit you can string together many words into a compound, and then you have to suss out what the compound means. You can imagine, it's not just red roses. It's red roses growing in the pool in a certain season and having a certain fragrance, and all that is packed into one big compound word. And so you have to figure that out. Anyway, at the end of this 5th canto, there's a description of different hellish planets for punishment for specific sins. It's quite hair-raising, and it's made very clear. This is just a sample of the planets. There's many more. Now I happen to, I had the great good fortune, by Krista's mercy, of being able to work on this book. The 5th canto, many devotees don't know this, but this was part of the marathon. There was a book marathon that took place in, I think, May, June, and July of 1975 in Los Angeles. Prabhupada was writing his books. It means that he would get up and he would dictate early in the morning. You've all heard about that. And everything that the books being published depended on the devotees who were downstream, meaning that the tapes had to be given to the transcriber, they had to be transcribed, and then they had to go to the editors and the composers, and the whole thing had to take place. The reason why Prabhupada could produce so many books is because he didn't see it again until the book was printed. Nor, in commercial or academic printing, there's a whole process. You write the book, now on a computer, and that's the first draft. Nobody sees that but you. Then you go over that and you make all kinds of changes. You rewrite the whole thing, and then you come up with a second draft, which is closer to what you want, Then you may actually go through and make further changes, and finally give to your editor what you consider as far as you can bring it. And the editor is going to suggest all kinds of things, may rip up, the whole thing. And then it goes back, there's a negotiation, back, I like that one, why not, until finally you have your publishing manuscript 2 years later, of a major 400-page book or something like that, or a year and a half. And that you give to the publisher. You sign a contract. Every word and period and comma that we have here has to be published, otherwise he's legally, so it's got to be perfect, right? You can imagine how much. So if Prabhupada had used that system, you can imagine we'd have 5 books instead of 50, 80 books. So anyway, so Prabhupada is writing his books, and the important thing is that we understand is that, this is Amnaya. It's coming down through Prabhupada from previous acharyas. He's giving us the essence that we can, in a way that we can understand. First of all, the language has got to be in English. That in itself is a problem because there are so many concepts and things that aren't translatable perfectly, isn't it? Just like the word rasa. What does it mean? Well, rasa is the taste and the pleasure of a relationship. There's no single word in English that means that. So Prabhupada's spiritual master used the word mellow. In English, the word mellow isn't even a noun, but that's come into the books. It has to be explained in so many things. So this is Amnaya, and this concept of prayaschitta. So now in the 6th canto, so what happened was that after the description of these hells, in the beginning, at the end of the 5th canto, the beginning of the 6th canto, Parikshit, who's hearing this, he's a soft-hearted Vaishnava. He wants, well, how can these people be saved? Is there any way that they can be saved from this horrible punishment that has been described? If you do this, I forget what it's for. You're thrown off. The Yamadutas, they take you. There's no mercy, and rip you out of your body, and off you go to hell. For to Yamaraj for judgment. Okay, send him to this hell to get the names. And there's just hard rocks there with big mountains, and they take you up to the mountain, they throw you down, and all your limbs are broken, but you don't die. Because you don't have any gross body. It's all in the mind. But you're suffering as if, hey, they take you up to the top of the mountain, throw you down again. This goes on for 10,000 years or something, So Parikshit's hearing this. He's aghast. So how can he be saved? How can he be saved? So Shukadev tests him. He first talks about this prayaschitta. How there were so many means of atonement and sacrifices you could perform, and austerities and penances, probably called austerities and penances. Penances means you're repenting something. There's also austerities have no penance. The demons perform to get some power. You know what I'm saying? So it's austerities and penances. Anyways, so after hearing that, what is Parikshit's answer? He says, that's not very convincing. Because even though you may negate to some degree, it's rarely 100%, you can mitigate, let's say mitigate the punishment, you can't really uproot by those processes the desire to commit sin again. So then you're liable to commit further sin, and you're entangled in some, it doesn't really work. And the example given is a kundra shochavat. Kundra is a word for elephant. A shochavat means bathing. So what do we know about how an elephant takes a bath? Nothing, until Prabhupada told us. So the elephants go into the river or a lake, and they take a bath, and they've got a perfect thing. They got a built-in shower head, right? So they're taking their enjoying in the bath in the lake, and they come out, but they have no towel. There's no gumsha for them to dry off. So what do? They roll around on the bank, and they get dirty again. So the idea is that sinning and confessing, sinning and confessing, sinning and confessing. So that's not going to work. So after that, Shukadev, he tells the story of Ajamil, how the holy name is so purifying that even if chanted, how did he chant it? I mean, he was a Paka Brahmin, and then out in the forest he saw a low class couple copulating, and he lost it, and he married. He went after her. She was a prostitute, and then he had all these children, and he became a real criminal and a sinner his whole life. But because he'd been raised in a Brahminical family, he names all his children after the names of God. So he had so many kids. Even he's 80 years old, he has a little boy, And so his name was Narayan. So he's lying on his deathbed there, and he sees the Yamadutas coming to rip him out of his body, and they're very frightening, with their eyes blazing, with, angry and everything. And so he's frightened, and he calls out, Narayan, Narayan! Prabhupada said, there's a famous lecture where he's hearing this read to him, and the book hasn't been printed yet. It's in manuscript form, So they're reading the manuscript, and the person reading, he says, Narayan, Narayan, Narayan! And Prabhupada stops. What does it say? 3 times? He said, once is enough. Once, Narayan is enough. Prabhupada had actually dictated 3 times, but anyway, it came out once in the book. So as soon as he chants Narayan, even if he indicates his boy, he wasn't chanting with any offense. He wasn't trying to sin on the things, chanting or anything like that. So the Vishnu Dutas came. Dutas simply means representatives or agents. So you got the Yamadutas and you got the Vishnu Dutas. And the Vishnu Dutas are more powerful. They stopped the Yamadutas. They said, why are you stopping us? He committed so many sins during his life. We're going to take him to our master. They didn't know. They thought that Yamaraj was the supreme Lord, that he was the supreme judge. And the Vishnu says, you don't know what's going on. Leave him here, So the Yamadutas were puzzled, and they went back to Yamaraj, and he has a whole instruction there. He explains the power of the holy name, and that Vishnu is supreme, and like that. And finally, what happens is Ajamil is saved. He gets a second chance. Have you seen that book? Second chance. So it's all about it's these passages in the 6th canto with Prabhupada's lectures. He gave lectures on many of those verses. It's a very important section. And at last, so Ajamil is saved. And then he, I guess he gets better from his disease. He goes off to the Himalayas, and retreat, and he perfects his devotion and goes back to Godhead. So just from chanting, he's relieved of all his sins. This is a very important topic, understanding, is that if you want to, just the point of being relieved of sins and not having to go to hell and take, and get a horrible birth, you should chant. Even 1 round a day or less, for that purpose. But it's important to realize that that's not the ultimate goal that we're after. We're after love for Krishna and going back to God. So Arjuna is deep in the realms of the Karmakanda section of the Vedas. This thing, Prayaschitta. He's not understanding really what's going on. All right, let's read. We'll finish this chapter. Aho batamahat papam kartum vyavasitavayam yad rajasuka lobhena hantum swajanam udnyataha. Alas, how strange it is that we are preparing to commit greatly sinful acts. Driven by the desire to enjoy royal happiness, we are intent on killing our own kinsmen. Purport. Driven by selfish motives, one may be inclined to such sinful acts as the killing of one's own brother, father, or mother. There are many such instances in the history of the world. But Arjuna, being a saintly devotee of the Lord, is always conscious of moral principles and therefore takes care to avoid such activities. So at least now, at this juncture, at the end of the first chapter, he's convinced himself that he doesn't want any part of this fight because it's a great sin. And so, he sits down on a chariot. Yadimam apatikaram ashastram shastapayanaha. Not payana, I'm sorry. Ashastram shastapanayaha. Dhartarashtra hanyus tanmeche mataram bhavet. Better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to kill me unarmed and unresisting on the battlefield. Purport. It is the custom, according to Kshatriya fighting principles, that an unarmed and unwilling foe should not be attacked. Arjuna, however, decided that even if attacked by the enemy in such an awkward position, he would not fight. He did not consider how much the other party was bent upon fighting. All these symptoms are due to soft-heartedness resulting from his being a great devotee of the Lord. Sanjaya vacha eva mukvarjanak sankhe rato pasta upabhishat visrijya sashadam chapam shokasam vignamanasaha. Sanjay said, Arjuna, having thus spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. Purport. While observing the situation of his enemy, Arjuna stood up on the chariot, but he was so afflicted with lamentation that he sat down again, setting aside his bow and arrows. Such a kind and soft-hearted person in the devotional service of the Lord is fit to receive self-knowledge. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the first chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of observing the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Okay, so before we go on to the next chapter, so what we see here is a display of someone who's confused about his duty, and that comes out in the 7th verse of the next chapter. There are so many conflicting pulls and pushes on, what he should do. And, the whole battle has been prepared and everyone's there and he's the key figure. But suddenly he's lost his desire to fight because he doesn't see any material reason to fight. He's calculating it, all right, look, if I fight and we win, then I get this kingdom. But what's the use of the kingdom? I will have been instrumental in killing all the people I love. Drona and Bhishma, they're worshipable for me. And I have so many relatives, it's described, we learn so many words if you really study this chapter. Mothers-in-law and brothers-in-law and first cousins, whatever. And all of them, there's a blood tie or a family tie, marriage tie, And so many, how many times in this chapter did we hear the words Dhartarashtra? Dhartarashtra means the sons of Dhritarashtra. They're the protagonists on the other side. They're cousins. And despite the fact that they've been attacked and cheated and, insulted, he still feels a tie to them and that he doesn't want to see them dead and killed, And then so he backed up. This is where his heart is, his gut reaction is. And he backed it all up with this argument from the Vedas that I'll be responsible for Varna Shankara. You remember the whole thing. But ultimately, he's not really convinced himself. He certainly hasn't convinced Krishna. But why would he be troubled? You know, he wouldn't even sit down. He'd run off. He'd say, "Well, I'm done." You know, he'd put his bow and arrow down and then walk off the battlefield. But he wasn't convinced, so he's torn. This is the thing, and this is really where we are, where we should be, in when we encounter this absolute philosophy, you know, which is virtue personified. It's the words of Krishna. It's what's right, and then we're confronted with all of our own, you know, imperfections and inabilities, and our awareness of all the things that we've done that have not been virtuous. You know, the four regs, well, generally if you live in a society, you break them all before you're 18 years old. You know, and so, you know, but we got a Bhagavad Gita and we read it, or I met a devotee, you know, so now I know there's a whole other way of life, a virtuous life, and now we're sitting on that chariot. Are we going to, you know, go with the flow, you know, and try to reject it? Or are we going to pursue what we know inside, because we're fortunate, is right, and try to change our lives according to, you know, what we hear and what we read, you know? So in effect, Arjuna is representing us, and Prabhupada makes that point here also. We should receive the Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna received it, and then we can get the same benefit. It's just like being on the battlefield. It's absolute. Krishna is speaking these words, we can hear it. Prabhupada has made it possible for us by translating it, and he's explained it in detail, so we can get the same benefit. It all depends on our attitude of receptivity, you know, and so that's our challenge, and we'll now see how you know, this whole relationship kind of morphs into a different one. Rather than friend to friend, it'll be guru and disciple, which is really what's necessary, to be in that receptive mood. All right, contents of the Gita summarized, chapter 2. Sanjaya vacha tam tata kripayavishtam ashupurnakulekshanam Vishidandamidham vakyam Uvacha Madhusudanaha. Sanjay said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan, Krishna, spoke the following words. Purport. Material compassion, lamentation, and tears are all signs of ignorance of the real self. Compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. The word Madhusudana is significant in this verse. Lord Krishna killed the demon Madhu, and now Arjuna wanted Krishna to kill the demon of misunderstanding that had overtaken him in the discharge of his duty. No one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. A man fallen in the ocean of nescience cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outward dress, the gross material body. One who does not know this and laments for the outward dress is called a Shudra, or one who laments unnecessarily. Arjuna was a Kshatriya, and this conduct was not expected from him. Lord Krishna, however, can dissipate the lamentation of the ignorant man, and for this purpose the Bhagavad Gita was sung by him. This chapter instructs us in self-realization by an analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul, as explained by the Supreme Authority, Lord Sri Krishna. This realization is possible when one works without attachment to fruitive results and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self. So there'll be, as Prabhupada has titled this, usually in most Bhagavad Gitas they title this as Sankhya Yoga, which means analytical, basically understanding the difference between matter and spirit. That's the Sankhya. But Prabhupada has rightly, also seen that the proper title is the contents of the Gita summarized, because there's a little of everything here. You're gonna, there's even talk of devotion to Krishna. There's certainly the soul in the Gita. There's talk, understanding of the material nature, and so forth. So it gives us a nice summary of the Gita. And Prabhupada has given extensive purports here. This is, I think, number of pages. It may be the longest, even longer than 18, which has fewer purports. So let's see how Bhagavan replies. Now they're still in the role of friend, and he's even like taking the role of the chariot driver, so he's not speaking about transcendental subjects at first. Shri Bhagavano Vacha Kutastva Kashpanamidam Vishame Samapastitam Anarya Jishtamasvargyam Akirti Kadamarjana. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjun, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy." Purport. Krishna and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are identical. Therefore, Lord Krishna is referred to as Bhagavan throughout the Gita. Bhagavan is the ultimate in the Absolute Truth. The Absolute Truth is realized in three phases of understanding, namely Brahman, or the impersonal all-pervasive spirit, Paramatma, or the localized aspect of the Supreme within the heart of all living entities, and Bhagavan, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, this conception of the Absolute Truth is explained thus. I'll say, you say. Vadanti tat vividas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti padamatmeti Bhagavan iti shabdyate. The Absolute Truth is realized in three phases of understanding by the knower of the Absolute Truth, and all of them are identical. Such phases of the Absolute Truth are expressed as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. These three divine aspects can be explained by the example of the sun, which also has three different aspects, namely the sunshine, the sun's surface, and the sun planet itself. One who studies the sunshine only is the preliminary student. One who understands the sun's surface is further advanced, and one who can enter into the sun planet is the highest. Ordinary students who are satisfied by simply understanding the sunshine, its universal pervasiveness, and the glaring effulgence of its impersonal nature, may be compared to those who can realize only the Brahman feature of the Absolute Truth. The student who has advanced still further can know the sun disk, which is compared to knowledge of the Paramatma feature of the Absolute Truth. And the student who can enter into the heart of the sun planet is compared to those who realize the personal features of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Therefore, the Bhaktas, or the Transcendentalists who have realized the Bhagavan feature of the Absolute Truth, are the topmost Transcendentalists, although all students who are engaged in the study of the Absolute Truth are engaged in the same subject matter. The sunshine, the sun disk, and the inner affairs of the sun planet cannot be separated from one another, and yet the students of the three different phases are not in the same category. The Sanskrit word Bhagavan is explained by the great authority Parashara Muni, the father of Vyasadeva. The Supreme Personality, who possesses all riches, all strength, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation, is called Bhagavan. There are many persons who are very rich, very powerful, very beautiful, very famous, very learned, and very much detached. But no one can claim that he possesses all riches, all strength, etc. entirely. Only Krishna can claim this because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No living entity, including Brahma, Lord Shiva, or Narayan, can possess opulences as fully as Krishna. Therefore it is concluded in the Brahma Samhita by Lord Brahma himself that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No one is equal to or above him. He is the primeval Lord, or Bhagavan, known as Govinda, and he is the supreme cause of all causes. I'll say, you say, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadid Adir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. There are many personalities possessing the qualities of Bhagavan, but Krishna is the supreme because none can excel him. He is the Supreme Person, and his body is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. He is the primeval Lord, Govinda, and the cause of all causes. Brahma Samhita 5.1. In the Bhagavatam also there is a list of many incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but Krishna is described as the original personality of Godhead, from whom many, many incarnations and personalities of Godhead expand. Also, you say, Ete changsa kalapungsa Krishnas to Bhagavan Swayam Indradi Vyakulam Lokam Mridayanti Yuge Yuge. All the lists of the incarnations of Godhead submitted herewith are either plenary expansions or parts of the plenary expansions of the Supreme Godhead. But Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. Bhagavatam 1.3.28. Therefore, Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, the source of both the Supersoul and the impersonal Brahman. In the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Arjuna's lamentation for his kinsman is certainly unbecoming, and therefore Krishna expressed his surprise with the word kuta, wherefrom. Such impurities were never expected from a person belonging to the civilized class of men known as Aryans. The word Aryan is applicable to persons who know the value of life and have a civilization based on spiritual realization. Persons who are led by the material conception of life do not know that the aim of life is realization of the Absolute Truth, Vishnu, or Bhagavan, and they are captivated by the external features of the material world, and therefore they do not know what liberation is. Persons who have no knowledge of liberation from material bondage are called non-Aryans. Although Arjuna was a Kshatriya, he was deviating from his prescribed duties by declining to fight. This act of cowardice is described as befitting the non-Aryans. Such deviation from duty does not help one in the progress of spiritual life, nor does it even give one the opportunity to become famous in this world. Lord Krishna did not approve of the so-called compassion of Arjuna for his kinsman. So, quite a purport there. And most of it is describing what the word Bhagavan means. Parashara Muni Prabhupada didn't quote the verse, but he has this famous verse, Aishvaryasya samagrasya viryasya yashashakshya, meaning that Bhagavan is defined as he who was full in possession of Aishwarya, wealth, and strength, fame, knowledge, beauty, and detachment, more renunciation. So that's very important because this is where Sri Bhagavan first speaks, and Prabhupada, when he translated these verses, and whenever it says Sri Bhagavan Vacha, he would always have the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, or its close equivalent. Sometimes, once I was just reading the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, the Personality of Godhead said, something like that. Not the Blessed Lord said. That was brought in from another Gita. And it was revised. We didn't know about it at the time. Jai Weidemans didn't know about it when he revised the Gita in 1983. But there's a conversation where Prabhupada directly says, why they say the Blessed Lord said. It should be the Supreme Personality of Godhead said. That's what he more or less said. I'm paraphrasing there. Because the whole thing, the whole authority of the Bhagavad Gita keys on the position of the speaker. In other words, it's kind of, when you realize what's going on, these are the words of God we're hearing here. If you really believe that and you understand this, then it adds more weight and more. You have a better chance of accepting it, of rather than cavilling and arguing this. But it says this over here and it says over there. What did he say? You just accept it. This is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's just a little history, editing history here. But Prabhupada goes to great length to describe the position of Bhagavan. He quotes this verse, which is really said by Jiva Goswami. There's something called the Paribhas Sutra, which is a phrase or a verse in a work that's understood to be the foundation of the whole work. Everything is built upon it. And here we just read it. Ete changsa kala pungsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. That one line. Even just the part that says Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. I remember way back when we used to have things called stationery, and you had the letterhead, and so this was back in Brooklyn, 73, 74, and we had the letterhead, and there was International Society of Krishna Consciousness, Brooklyn branch, in this address, 43 Henry Street, New York, and then it said before you even had room to write anything else, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, and then you would write, there would be room to write something there. So that's how important this phrase is. What it means is, etek chansta kalapungsa. Previous to this, in the Bhagavatam, in the second and the third chapter there is a list of many incarnations. It's more, you've heard of the Dash avatars, the 10 avatars. Well, there's these 10 avatars and others also. The 4 Kumaras are in there. They're not Vishnu, but they're empowered. They're Shaktivesh. Narada Muni is there, I think, as empowered, And so Krishna's among them, which is a little puzzling at first. Wait a minute. He's an empowered, he's expansion. No, he's in the list, but then this verse says, all of these are angsha or kala, meaning that they're partial expansion of Krishna, or plenary, means full. He could expand himself into various Vishnu forms. Just like Nrsingadev, he's Krishna, but he doesn't manifest all of the qualities of Krishna. One of the ones that he really manifests quite a lot is strength, but he doesn't manifest the beauty in the same way that Krishna does, like that. But he's Vishnu Tattva. You've heard of this. So everything that exists is either a plenary expansion of Krishna or a partial expansion of Krishna, which includes the energy. I mean, all this material energy that we call it. Prabhupada, I just heard the lecture. Many times he says, ultimately nothing is material. The material is in our own mind, because it's provided, it can act as a covering for Krishna, so we can see the spirit within everything. But what is this? This is all Krishna's expansion. Just like you're in the sun, and there's the sunshine. You're not looking at the sun directly, but the sun is there, and that the sunshine is coming from there. So the sun and the sunshine are in one sense one. The energy and the energetic. So here he's saying all of these expansions that he just named are either empowered, angsha means particles, or they're kala, meaning that they're plenary expansions. Because he names Matsya, he names Varaha, he names Nrsingadev, Ramchandra's in the list, But, then this word two, keyword, Krishna's two, but Krishna is Bhagavan himself. In other words, he's the source of everything. He's the one who Brahma sings to, the Supreme Personality. And so if we really want the absolute truth, and we can get it directly from him, then we're really in business, There's no chance of distortion when we get it straight. So that's, Prabhupada is establishing the authority of the Bhagavad Gita, why it's so important. It's the direct words of Bhagavan. That's why it's called Bhagavad Gita. So it goes on. All right, let's read the next one. So he's arguing now from the point of another Kshatriya. Krishna takes the role of a Kshatriya here. And even the chariot driver is supposed to buck up the courage of the warrior on the chariot if this happens. It's one of his duties, so he's performing it. Klaibyam parta. All right, let's try it again. Everybody? Klaibyam parta. Naitatvai upapadyate. Chudram vidya daubalyam. Chakvotishta parantapa. O son of Pritha, do not yield to this degrading impotence. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise, O chastiser of the enemies. Purport. Arjuna was addressed as the son of Pritha, who happened to be the sister of Krishna's father, Vasudeva. Therefore, Arjuna had a blood relationship with Krishna. If the son of a Kshatriya declines to fight, he is a Kshatriya in name only. And if the son of a Brahmin acts impiously, he is a Brahmin in name only. Such Kshatriyas and Brahmins are unworthy sons of their fathers. Therefore, Krishna did not want Arjuna to become an unworthy son of a Kshatriya. Arjuna was the most intimate friend of Krishna, and Krishna was directly guiding him on the chariot. But in spite of all these credits, if Arjuna abandoned the battle, he would be committing an infamous act. Therefore, Krishna said that such an attitude in Arjuna did not fit his personality. Arjuna might argue that he would give up the battle on the grounds of his magnanimous attitude for the most respectable Bhishma and his relatives. But Krishna considered that sort of magnanimity mere weakness of heart. Such false magnanimity was not approved by any authority. Therefore, such magnanimity, or so-called nonviolence, should be given up by persons like Arjuna under the direct guidance of Krishna. So Arjuna will refuse. He's arguing now. Arjuna Vacha Katam Bhishmam Maham Sankye Dronam Chamadusudana Ishubi Patayotsyami Pujaha Vadisudana. Arjuna said, O killer of enemies, O killer of Madhu, how can I counteract with arrows in battle men like Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of my worship? Purport. Respectable superiors like Bhishma, the grandfather, and Dronacharya, the teacher, are always worshipable. Even if they attack, they should not be counterattacked. It is general etiquette that superiors are not to be offered even a verbal fight. Even if they are sometimes harsh in behavior, they should not be harshly treated. Then how is it possible for Arjuna to counterattack them? Would Krishna ever attack his own grandfather Ugrasen or his teacher Sandipani Muni? These were some of the arguments offered by Arjuna to Krishna. Guru nahatva himahano bhavan Shreyo bhoktum bhaikshamapih loke Hatvata kamangs tu guru nihaiva Bunji habogan hudadap pratigdan. It would be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, they are superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted with blood. And I think it's understood, even though it's not in the Sanskrit or the English, will be tainted with their blood. Purport. According to scriptural codes, a teacher who engages in an engaged in an abominable action and has lost his sense of discrimination is fit to be abandoned. Bhishma and Drona were obliged to take the side of Duryodhana because of his financial assistance, although they should not have accepted such a position simply on financial considerations. Under the circumstances, they have lost the respectability of teachers. But Arjuna thinks that nevertheless they remain his superiors, and therefore to enjoy material profits after killing them would mean to enjoy spoils tainted with blood. All right, actually let's do one more, because it's a natural break. After this, Arjuna surrenders and everything changes. Nachaitad vidma katadanno gariyo yadva jayem yadivano jayehu Yane bahutva najijibishamas te bastita pramake dartarastra. Now, nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live. Yet they are now standing before us on the battlefield. Purport. Arjuna did not know whether he should fight and risk unnecessary violence, although fighting is the duty of the Kshatriyas, or whether he should refrain and live by begging. If he did not conquer the enemy, begging would be his only means of subsistence. Nor is there certainty of victory, because either side might emerge victorious. Even if victory awaited them, and their cause was justified, still, if the sons of Dhritarashtra died in battle, it would be very difficult to live in their absence. Under the circumstances, that would be another kind of defeat for them. All these considerations by Arjuna definitely proved that not only was he a great devotee of the Lord, but he was also highly enlightened and had complete control over his mind and senses. His desire to live by begging, although he was born in the royal household, is another sign of detachment. He was truly virtuous, as these qualities combined with his faith in the words of instruction of Sri Krishna, his spiritual master, indicate. It is concluded that Arjuna was quite fit for liberation. Unless the senses are controlled, there is no chance of elevation to the platform of knowledge. And without knowledge and devotion, there is no chance of liberation. Arjuna was competent in all these attributes over and above his enormous attributes in his material relationships. Okay, so we'll resume there on Monday. And then this seminal verse is Surrender to Krishna as the Guru, text 7. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.